Oh, hey everybody, it's Patreon sponsored review time again. Klaatu Bata Nikto! Well, that didn't work, so let's just talk about Giant Robo the day the Earth stood still. See what it did there? Created in 1967, Giant Robo began as a 3-volume manga series created by Mitsuteru Yokoyama, who is more well known for creating Tetsujin 28, one of the more famous mecha, as it was one of the first prominent humanoid heroic robots in fiction, to the point that it was imported to the Americas as Gigantor. While Tetsujin has had much prominence over the years because of this, Giant Robo, well, yes and no. As with only 3 volumes to the manga, there wasn't that much to work with. The manga chronicled the machinations of the secret organization Big Fire, who, like many organizations of their era of fiction, were a cult trying to make the world go wrong by upsetting the status quo of the people through their varied manipulations and machinations. Their weapons of terror to facilitate that were, in fact, the Giant Robos, 3 nuclear-powered titans specializing in combat on the land, sea, and sky. To thwart them, secret agents working for the United Nations attempted to infiltrate their organization, only for Big Fire to mistake a Japanese tourist, a young boy named Daisaku Kusama, as having connection to one of the sent agents. In their attempts to escape from the organization, the first Giant Robo became bonded to him, allowing him to use the machine to fight the other units in Big Fire's control, and other monsters under their command. However, with not much being there, it left writer Masaru Igami, who would later be known for writing a lot of Showa Kamen Rider, to do what he wanted with the source content, and in late 1967, he and Toei would turn the manga into a 26-episode tokusatsu series, with it being an attempt to create a competitor to the Showa-era Ultra series. And that series did not successfully compete with the at the time airing Ultra 7. Go figure. The most that Toei would ultimately get out of the production is exporting the show to the West, with it being redubbed as Johnny Sacco and His Flying Robot, which got a DVD release from Shout Factory many, many years ago. But despite the series not having that much to it, it still obtained 2 more adaptations of the material. The last to date was a 13-episode anime series made in 2007, produced by the animation company Soft Garage, which they had written by Chiaki Konaka. And as this was during Konaka's tenure of him basically moving to destroy his own career, the 2007 series is a mess. It makes it so that the Giant Robos were ancient creations designed to fight off eldritch beings originating from the Cthulhu mythos. But when a terrorist organization called Gigantic Rebellion Operators starts finding and awakening them, this reboot's Daisaku ends up finding his Giant Robo and is tasked in stopping these attacks, which all seem to be tied into the news organization Broadcast Frontline Network, who are broadcasting GROW's operations to manipulate distribution of information and influence the unaware masses, them essentially inventing a crisis by which to drive public opinion towards seeking self-destruction. For those who watched my review of Big O and saw how much of the Kool-Aid Chiaki Konaka has drunk by conspiracy theorists, again, this is during his descent into believing factual news organizations were lying and only the extremist conspiracy theorists who are demonstrably lying were dispensing actual truth. Thus, of course, his chosen villain would make it so that, instead of an actual cult trying to make things good for them at the cost of the well-being of everyone else, it would be a public news organization. As was discussed last year, though, there is no deep state nonsense as is being peddled. The people who make the world go wrong time and again have operated in the open to promote extremism and hate towards those that have done nothing to them, and thus build a hate mob on the false promise of strength and power. Cults build their base in the open by manipulating idiots. But this is again a case of shouting the quiet part out loud, considering how manipulation of media by rich conservative assholes has negatively affected people's lives by the lies and conspiracies they spread. As in modern context, the BFN, get it? Big Fire Network? come off as extremist right-wing agitators whose manipulated conflicts can be exposed for the lies they are. And extremist networks are not mainstream news media. While I'm uncertain if this is the root reason why the series failed, as, yeah, it was originally going to be a 3-cour series instead of the 13 episodes it got, it would not surprise me if it was. But before that, throughout the 1990s, there was a far more positively received re-envisioning of the Giant Robo series. The 7-part OVA series, Giant Robo, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Klaatu, Murata, This OVA series was created by Yasuhiro Imagawa, who is best known as being the head director of Mobile Fighter G Gundam, and it was considered a lot more faithful to the source material. But instead of being a straight Giant Robo series, it also mashed in a bunch of Mitsuteru Yokoyama's other creations and characters, due to Imagawa being denied the rights to use the supporting characters of Giant Robo's manga or prior tokusatsu series. This is because of, unsurprisingly, Toei's own completely draconian authority over anything they may have licensed at any point. Toei did not own the rights to Yokoyama's manga. They did not own the rights to characters that originated from the manga. But because they had used versions of those characters in their earlier Toku show, they acted as if they owned them all outright. And this isn't something they've stopped doing. YouTubers who have reviewed manga that Toei has adapted have received takedown strikes for talking about just the manga, with nothing on screen being something Toei made or had the rights to. It's a massive overreach in their claims over content, and this is just an example that Japan's own industry as much suffers from abuses of copyright. But yeah, because Toei are awful as always, Imagawa went to Yokoyama and asked to create a greater amalgamated story. So Giant Robo and Daisaku became members of a large team of heroes working to stop a far more powerful Big Fire organization that assembled said heroes' antagonists into it, with them sourced from Yokoyama's series Akakage, Babel II, and God Mars. The last being another giant robot series Yokoyama was involved with in the 1980s, and the title Mecha being infamous for not actually shown to be moving in animation. This makes it so mecha genre heroes are being mashed up with full-out supernatural espers and larger-than-life wuxia-style martial arts heroes, all done in a futuristic setting that allows them to all properly coexist without much issue. Help that the art style for the series was retro-futuristic, using the rounded appearance made common to the medium in the 1950s and 60s by Osamu Tezuka, Shotaro Ishinomori, and Go Nagai, so the characters together still feel consistent. Regardless, that's probably what helps make this OVA series be more of note to many, with it being a culmination of Yokoyama's body of work created by a more modern writer that still held respect for the earlier works. Hell, this series was supposed to be the first of a few OVA mini-series intended to build out an entire saga, set both before and after this series to retell and reimagine the entire conflict with Big Fire and the other antagonists of Yokoyama's work. But that all fell through because instead of the originally intended 36-month release plan, it ended up taking 6 years for every episode of the OVA series to be made. Thus, by the time it concluded, the interest for it had disappeared. Now, in those gaps, they did try to fill the time with a companion OVA series focused around the character Ginrei, which expanded upon her role and capabilities. And in that gap time, much of the production staff would work on The Big O, which, as discussed in the previous video, drew immense inspiration from Giant Robo, as well as the lot working on Getter Robo Armageddon's initial OVA episodes. For what it's worth, the OVA series has been received positively, with a lot of intellectual depth seen from the narrative arc and its themes. The problem for us in the West, however, is most of us have not been deeply exposed to Yokoyama's work, so a lot of us coming into this OVA series are just coming in blind. And because it's supposed to be the second to last story arc in a larger series, where the other parts of it were never made, Xenogears. That's what was bugging me about this. This is the same thing that happened with Xenogears. It drops many of us into things without proper context, and we just have to accept things as they come in and are presented and accept the series on its own merits. Which, admittedly, for me when I first saw it, left me a bit cold to it, since I'm someone that likes a story that tells a serialized saga to, start at the beginning. The OVA series is, however, focused upon the dark secrets that lay behind an incident known as the tragedy of Bashtarl. 10 years before the events of the OVA series, the world of this setting was deep into a disastrous energy crisis, with fossil fuels on the verge of being completely depleted, and other energy sources not being able to provide world power needs. Wow! Advancements in wind, water, and solar power generation in the last 80 years have clearly been completely disregarded by this. Yeah, that's actually the narrative point of the OVA. The dangers of becoming over-reliant on one source of energy, when that energy source becomes unreliable, and thus leads to disaster when that supply becomes unavailable. Once more, something reflected in real life the last few years, what with, the whole Russian oil embargo situation after they invaded Ukraine that led to global fuel price gouging. Regardless, with the world on the verge of war over the resources that were left, the only way to retain world peace was to find another way to have electrical power. Thus, a bunch of scientists came together and eventually created a system known as the Shizuma drive, which produces clean energy. But unfortunately, there was a defect in the drive that caused the original tragedy of Bashtarl incident, whose consequences destroyed an entire country. As is revealed in the OVA series, the majority of the scientists rushed their trials of the energy production system, regardless of the warnings of their last member, Franken von Vogler. So when mass destruction ended up being caused as consequence of their original drive design, and Vogler appeared to sacrifice himself to shut it down, their mass screw-up was blamed on Vogler, so they could be given the time to properly complete their work and end the energy crisis, hoping the lives saved from an operational drive would be enough to act for the penance of their sin. Vogler's children, however, did not share that opinion. Vogler's son Emmanuel acts as the main antagonist of The Day the Earth Stood Still, having received financing from Big Fire to complete a world doomsday weapon that destroys all the Shizuma drives by manipulating a previously unknown defect in said drives, one that was causing the tragedy of Bashtarl to repeat itself at a far slower, impossible-to-detect rate. The defective drives that were mass-produced release a byproduct over time that causes the depletion of oxygen in proximity to them, and if left over time, would cause the entire atmosphere to collapse, killing everyone on the planet. And Emmanuel's doomsday weapon manipulates this defect and hyper-accelerates the propagation of this byproduct, making something that would have taken decades happen in seconds thanks to 3 specialized samples of the original Shizuma drive. And if Emmanuel can secure them to install them into his weapon, then the entire world will end. And with everything powered by Shizuma drives, there's no plausible way to use any form of technology to stop the damage they would deal. As even, say, underground shelters that could cycle their own air wouldn't have any power to run. With it ironically being just Giant Robo that is nuclear powered, having the capacity to confront and stop Emmanuel's doomsday device. Oh, come on! Yeah, in this setting, nuclear-powered anything is deeply stigmatized as dangerous anachronistic technology. Thus, upon the revelation that Giant Robo is a nuclear robot, well, the hero faction doesn't take kindly to that, as they suddenly feel that if Robo were put in a serious fight, that the robot could disastrously blow up. The thing is, with nuclear reactors for giant robots, they're not exactly designed in the same way to go off like a nuclear bomb would. I mean, they can if they're set in a self-destruct mode, but that is not what happens by default. And frustratingly, the international police organization that backs the heroes are not the only ones screwing themselves over. The internal factions of Big Fire's Magnificent 10 also end up complicating this due to them being deceived by Emmanuel for his goal. After all, they can't get what they want out of ruling the world if there's no world left to rule. Thus, factions trying to stay true to Big Fire's longer scheme end up infighting with those that are backing Emmanuel's plans. But due to this OVA series being 6 hours long, and there's a lot of characters involved here, well, there's not exactly a lot of time paid to any single one of them. It goes back to that problem I described before, that the narrative drops the audience into the action without proper grounding and introduction to the characters, since it's written to be a late story in their saga, where it's presumed you would already know who all of these people are. The strongest characters that come across in this tale are main character Daisaku, leading Lady Ginrei, and their foil Emmanuel as a result. Emmanuel truly believes what he's doing is what his father would want, so the world can repent for the sins that were unjustly blamed upon his father, despite that being him projecting his own anger on those not responsible for it. He could have exposed the other scientists and their lie amidst everything else, revealed the crisis at their door with example of this doomsday weapon to correct the failure. But what he wants takes precedence over all, which truly does make him the villain of this tale. For Ginrei, it's revealed over the course of the story that she is Vogler's second child and Emmanuel's sister. This has to work with reconciling this madness born of her family members with what she once knew of them. Not believing her father that has been scapegoated for a decade would want this. And Daisaku himself acts as a counterpoint to Emmanuel himself. In this version of the story, Daisaku's father is the creator of Giant Robo, having been kidnapped by Big Fire to build it, but rebelled against the cult by locking the machine to the control of solely his son. Thus, like Emmanuel, he carries the legacy of the dangerous creation his father engineered and the responsibility to do right by his wishes. But unlike Vogler, what Daisaku's father wanted for his son was very clear.
They say that you can never achieve happiness without sacrifice. Now promise me to answer that question when we see one another again.
Now, unfortunately, this is where I end up hitting a wall when talking about the series, as I do not want to spoil the ending, as the ending absolutely makes this story what it is and why it is worth a watch. The twist of the tale is that good. And unlike a lot of stories where the twist makes or breaks it, it does not invalidate the actions performed by the cast leading up to it had that twist been revealed earlier. Twists like that can make a tale devolve into being an idiot plot if done wrong, as the series of events before that are what make the story matter. They need to happen, and if a twist derails the entire point of the previous actions taken, then it makes the entire story worthless. This does not happen here. And I can't even explain why without unveiling what that twist is, as I feel it's that legitimate. But there is something that does annoy me about this series, and it is how it handles Daisaku's personal arc, and how the story insists Daisaku has to grow up and abandon childish idealism for the cynicism of what is necessary to be done as an adult. And it is a moral lesson that is misguided in the way it is being presented. The heroes of the story constantly perform meaningless sacrifices throughout the entire story, because it is believed that hard choices are needed for one to be an adult. And yet, them performing those actions makes no difference in stopping the crisis or saving people. They are killing themselves for no reason or benefit. This happens over and over again to make their loss meaningless. And that's not what being an adult is. For as an adult, one must be responsible for one's actions and participating in society. Not just in obtaining personal well-being, but also in building a sustainable society for one to exist in. And that requires one to, at times, be pragmatic. One must believe in something, but understand that there are times where one's beliefs are not absolute and inviolate, as they will not apply to the situations one finds themselves in or towards others. You don't reject morals or idealism, you understand that there are circumstances where they are not applicable. As such, what one believes in must be set aside for the benefit of others when there may be no easy answer. For making no choice or the wrong choice because of a moral excuse is nothing but moral cowardice, at least assuming you actually believe in those morals. And I've made several videos about content that fucks that up. Often this moral lesson tries to apply that grow up and abandon idealism lesson to heroism, where the hallmark of a hero is someone that does not compromise their principles to do things the easy way, and yet they make hard choices to help people that sometimes puts their lives on the line. The hard choice being what the best way is to save people from a threat or crisis. Sometimes, that best way is to kill someone. Sometimes the best way requires letting a mass murderer live. And sometimes that best choice will require a pragmatic choice the hero in question hates be taken, but will have to live with.
I lied. I cheated. I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men. I am an accessory to murder. But the most damning thing of all, I think I can live with it. And if I had to do it all over again, I would.
And what needs to be understood about that is the adult thing for a hero to do will be to recognize that sometimes the world will not hand someone an easy choice. So to make excuses for one's actions, instead of accepting the consequences of what one does, is to not take responsibility for them. And if you cannot take responsibility for your actions, you are not a hero, or you are not the hero of your story. A hero's duty is consequently to find the best way to solve something, and if their morals may prevent them from one path, then such is not an excuse for one to sit back and do nothing as the situation is then made worse. Those morals should drive one to find a better way if one exists and not close oneself off to new opportunities, or come to accept that the choice they hate is the only one they can do, and thus follow through and not continuously refuse to take that option. For seeking that better way, that is a large part in what defines true heroism, and that is not what the supposed heroes that are Daisaku seniors in this tale are teaching him. For sadly, this is the same trap this OVA series falls into from the opposite direction, as it states that one's personal beliefs should be discarded under all circumstances for the benefit of others, instead of those values being one factor in how one comes to decisions. Children often do not make great decisions because they are still developing their morals and controlling their impulses to make wiser judgments. And yet in a story where a child has a strong moral center, developed far in advance of what one should possess at that age to be mature in such situations, it feels wrong to condemn him for his morals as this story does. And that is my ultimate problem with this plotline. For this sacrifice of self to selfless goals is ultimately tainted by the selfish pride, vanity, and ego of those who are criticizing Daisaku's views and beliefs, which permit him to make good, moral decisions. They, as consequence, have shut themselves off to different waves of thought and opportunities to resolve their crisis without the need of meaningless death, and they have made the wrong decisions rashly because of it, no matter how childish that in truth is, because suddenly that is stated to be the adult thing to do. For as we've seen time and again in real life, the things that make our world go wrong are all rooted in those who are selfish, arrogant, sociopathic, narcissistic assholes that only care about themselves and what's important to them, seeking to control the things they have no right to, and dismissing the solutions that fix long-standing problems that affect all of us negatively as it inconveniences them to work towards that solution, or they are the cause of the problem in the first place. Idealism, childish or otherwise, prevents such, as it leaves one open to being empathetic towards the suffering of others and take part in fixing it. And consequently, in those moments, they're not fighting for the benefit of others, it is their own arrogance driving them down these paths. And thus, with the thesis of the story being about how happiness requires sacrifice, it shows the adults in the story are being irresponsible children with the sacrifices they are making. So them trying to make Daisaku into the same type of person as they are by attempting to make him disregard the reality of the responsibilities he's charged with, just because the situation from their view demands he do so, in order to change him into an irresponsible adult, is thematically wrong. Meaningless sacrifice causes nothing but tragedy, and meaningless sacrifice will not bring happiness, only pain. But when those sacrifices are done with full knowledge that they will matter, at least to be able to save someone, then what is being given up will have value even after they are gone. That's when someone can look back on what has been given up and see the benefits of what can come from doing so. And that's sadly something that's not seen from this OVA series. Or at least not in my opinion. It's questionable if that's what Imagawa was trying to impress with this story, too. As by the end, Daisaku himself also almost performs a meaningless sacrifice, only to be stopped at the final moment from following in the path of all those whose loss was utterly pointless throughout this conflict. So if one is taking the story at face value, it infers that Daisaku learns the meaning of becoming an adult from the example of his seniors. But that is the wrong lesson to take away from it all, as that path has only done real harm when applied to real life. And despite that being my central criticism of the series, I'd actually recommend it overall because of the twist ending the story fully builds up to, which again, I'm not going to spoil. I legitimately believe it to be worth it to see, to at least showcase how older-styled mecha storytelling was done before the days of Mazinger, Get a Robo, and Gundam entirely redefined what it meant to be a mecha series, and is a positive representation overall of being an old-school tale brought into the modern era successfully. Check it out, and possibly see if you can't track down some of Tatsujin 28 as well, as the tales of that series are fun.